parents will filter up as the evening goes on. But we wanted to, first of all, thank you all for sticking around. We really debated when to do this. This is a talk that really all of our peer schools have been doing over the last few months. I know that because I'm doing that talk in most of our peer schools, which I'll talk about in a minute. And I thought, oh, maybe we should do it here. And we also trying to figure out, since many of you are coming from pretty far away, like when can we do this that it wouldn't be onerous to come in another time? We didn't want to have this over Zoom. We wanted to be in person for obvious reasons. We're talking about a little bit less tech, not more tech. So we appreciate your sticking around. So we tacked it on to curriculum night. But knowing that it's a long night, we're not going to do everything tonight. We really want to give you a good introduction, really start a conversation. We also know that we can't talk too long, both because it's a school night, you got to get home to your kids, and also because we know that you all have phones and your attention spans are shorter. So we have to keep it a little bit shorter. So this is what we're going to do. I just want to promise you one thing. I'm going to frustrate you tonight because I'm not going to give you all the answers to what to do with your children tonight. I actually want to bring you in to the conversation that's being had really across the country, across North America, particularly in Jewish day schools, but not just in Jewish day schools, also on millions of podcasts and TV and all those other things, and really bring you a little bit behind the scenes, and then talk about and help you really understand it, because I think we could just jump into a bunch of guidelines. Those guidelines are going to be hard for you to implement if you don't, I think, understand kind of more deeply what the challenges are that we're dealing with. I also know that if we get up here as the leaders of a school and we say, you should do 10 things at home, go home, some of you will say, yeah, I want to do it at home, and it'll be really, really hard to implement and you'll give up. And some of you will say, like, who are you to tell me? And it's not going to go anywhere. This is really going to have to be a partnership between the school and the families. We for a long time, I think we made a mistake. We've gotten, some parents have been coming to us for years and saying, you as a school really needs to communicate to our families what we should be doing at home with technology because we can't do it on our own. And we kind of demurred, and we said, we have enough to deal with in school. Home is home. We want to respect your parenting. And we kind of left it at that. We had some meetings about it, and that was about it. And I think that Jonathan Haidt, we'll talk about it in a moment, has really heightened our perception to the fact that this is a collective action problem, which means that it's really very hard for any one family to make this change on their own. And therefore, it does behoove us as a school, as a community, to come together and across schools. And so that's why we're really opening this conversation. That means that this is not just something that comes from us, although we will put out guidelines over the course of the year. It's also going to come from you working with each other to figure out how to set these boundaries as a culture. This is a very deep problem. So with no further ado, I'm going to jump in and just tell you how we came to this. So as some of you know, the Schwab Center, and I want to promise you, it's 7:15. You will be out of here before 9. All right, that's my promise. So I hope you can all get a little bit of food and sustenance in you and keep focused for a little bit longer. I will try to be somewhat entertaining at 8 o'clock at night. So, as many of you know, the Schwab Center is our outreach arm to other Jewish day schools, other educators, other parents across the country. We have impacted, Rebecca can give you the exact figures, it's like 1,200 educators over the past year in over 100 schools, impacting tens of thousands of students. So it's really become a big part of what we do, and it really feeds back into the excellence that I think we hope to provide for your children here at the Schwab School every day. One of the pieces that's come up very recently is The Anxious Generation, and the book that Jonathan Haidt came out with this spring. But even before that, how many of you were at his lecture at KJ in December? We had a handful of you in the room. He came out, so how many of you have heard of this book? How many of you have read the book? Keep your hands up. Excellent. Okay, so I'm only going to go over the book briefly, and then I'm going to try to give some behind the scenes a little bit, and then I'll get into what we're going to do about it. So, when he came and spoke at KJ on the Upper East Side, he was speaking to the Jewish day school world. Why? Because he believes that the real change agents for this can be schools like ours. Schools and communities that really work together around a shared set of values and that have the ability to set kind of norms within our community in a way that's much harder for public schools to do. Even so, since the book, so that was in December. The book didn't come out till March. At the book launch, the Tikva Fund, which brought him to KJ and has been spearheading this within the Jewish community, had a 2-day summit. 50 Jewish day schools were represented, over 200 people, at a 2-day summit here in Manhattan. And we really talked as a group, how can we do this as a Jewish day school community? These are schools across North America, obviously many from the New York area, but not only. People from as far away as Miami and LA and Toronto. And we came together. I was one of the keynote speakers, and you're going to see now a kind of further adaptation of the talk that I gave that day. And what I attempted to do is I wasn't going to repeat. I'm going to repeat a little bit of what he showed us in the book because it gives context. And then what I hope I can give you is, as a psychologist and a school administrator, and as a parent of 3 kids, I can give you what I think is going on behind the numbers. He's very good at presenting why it's so scary, and I'm going to try to explain why that's impacting our kids. Important note, this is way more dangerous for our students with learning disabilities and ADHD than it is for typical kids. So our kids are impacted by this more so, just like they're affected by everything else more so. You'll see why in a minute. And so I'm going to try to explain why that is, which I think will then feed us into how we do this together. What I will not have time to do tonight, because I don't want to keep you here until 10 o'clock, is if you list of things to change at home, it'll be very hard for you to do. What we'll then do is hopefully come together as a community. I'm going to ask for volunteers to come together as parent ambassadors, but everyone will be involved, to do this over time and really think through how we as a community can make changes. Don't worry, I will send emails. I'm not going to call you back in here every time. I will send emails over the course of the year giving you other ideas of how to change things at home that you can do slowly over time and change that culture. So that's what I'm going to do and not do tonight. So let me give you just a little bit, and we'll do this quickly because many of you have read the book or heard some of these stats already. Jonathan Haidt, and so these first few slides are basically taken from his research, and so I just wanted to cite him from the beginning. So the first thing to remember is that technology is always starting anew. And you can see the speed with which different telecommunications took hold in the United States. Radio being first, kind of went up pretty quickly, but then it leveled off. TV, personal computer, internet, and then smartphone and social media. And you can see their meteoric rise, that within about a 10-year period, they went from being 0 or close to 0 to nearly 100% of Americans. So that's really, really fast, and we're adapting to that. And then what do we see in that same exact time period from around 2010 until 2020? I want to point out, these slides do not include the pandemic. The pandemic was terrible for kids' mental health. We're actually looking at the data before the pandemic, which is also pretty scary. The pandemic only made it worse. So what happened? He points out that for 50 years, the rates of psychopathology in kids and teens were roughly the same. They go up, they go down, up and down. They were kind of in the same range. They weren't, we always want them to be better, but they weren't moving in any discernible pattern until around 2010. And then you see this meteoric rise. Things are roughly double. Anorexia doubled. ADHD went up 72%. Anxiety and depression are the most noticeable. They went up 134 and 106%. That is double and more than double what they were just in 10 years. What happened with major depression? That was in college. This is teens with depression broken up by boys and girls. Now, girls always have more depression than boys. Boys have more behavioral problems than girls. This is a well-known fact. So you see that numbers start, girls are always higher here, and the girls go up. Obviously, that curve looks really scary. They went up by more than double, 135%. But I want to point out something interesting, which is that the boy curve, it doesn't look as steep, but they actually went up by a bigger percentage, right? It's actually double and a half, 161%, which for the people who argue that social media is the main problem, girls are the ones who are affected most deeply by social media. Boys are most affected deeply by gaming. So I don't think social media is the main story here. I actually think the phones are the main story here. But we'll get to why. Suicide rates. So one might say, oh, you know what? Mental health care has gotten better. We're identifying more kids. We know more about this stuff. That's why we're actually able to diagnose it. Maybe, but that would not show up in suicide rates. Suicide rates, you can't fake that. That is or it isn't, right? And again, the suicide rate since 1982 had been up and down, but roughly the same. And in that period, almost doubled for boys, and went 1.5 times, 167%, more than double and a half for girls. So this is not just psychopathology because we're better at diagnosing it. Depression level by social media use. Social media use, I'm not going to defend social media tonight, but you're going to see that, and I'm just saying that phones I think are actually a bigger story here, but you can see social media use, when you get to that higher amount of social media use, you get a much higher rate of depression. Girls who use 5 hours a day are nearly 40% rates of depression. You might think, 5 hours a day of social media, that's insane, until you saw the research this week, which is that roughly half of teens have 5 more hours of social media a day. Social media, we know, impacts social comparison, right? They're always comparing themselves to people on the screen, and of course we know social media curates your best self, so I'm always going to look bad. It then breeds low self-esteem, body dissatisfaction. This comes almost intuitively to us. We know why. Disordered eating, which comes from that poor body dissatisfaction, and then ultimately suicidal thoughts and actions. Again, not in everybody. Thank God most kids can deal with it, but as we saw, something like 40% of kids who do a lot of it, or 40% of girls who do a lot of it, and 15% of boys who do a lot of it really are struggling. They're also just deeply dissatisfied with themselves. Again, since 91, you see that curve is up and down, kind of it's about the same. Around between 65 and 70% have personal satisfaction, and then 2010, the numbers plummet. They often feel lonely, right? Flat, flat, flat. All of a sudden it goes up between 2010 and 2020. Life feels meaningless, right? We as a community who really values meaning in our life, and then all of a sudden we're seeing, there is some protective factor for being traditionally engaged in a religious society, which is helpful, but we see that overall, it's actually getting better, and then all of a sudden in 2010 it shoots up. All right, and then, sorry, the question that he asked is, well, couldn't you tie all these slides to something else? Couldn't it be that 2010 we had the economic downturn, and we had more school shootings, and you could list a million things. The problem is that this happened not just here in America, it happened across Western countries, especially English-speaking countries, and those countries did not have the same factors that we had going on. Like one of those slides was from the UK. Another problem is that the kinds of stressors that our kids have experienced are not actually different or necessarily worse than stressors that kids experienced all the way back to the 50s or 60s or 80s when you see those other slides from. So he basically makes the argument, and we can question it, that really the main thing going on here is screens and social media. And I saw it, and I'll be totally honest. So I was trained as a researcher, and I read a psychologist from, I think, Brown, who writes a very good Substack, and she analyzed his data. He said, well, the data's okay, but it's a little correlational. It might not be 100%. There could be other factors. And then the question was, she got to the end. She's like, what am I going to do for my small kids? I'm going to do everything that Jonathan Haidt said, because even if he's not 100% right, he's a lot right. And there's some really basic things that we need to be able to do. Okay, so I'm going to break this down, and now you're going to see, this is what Jonathan Haidt, I think, does not explain as well as he could. But as a clinical psychologist, I saw this in the data right away, and this is what really impacts our students in particular here at Schwab. So there are 4 ways that I want to focus on that really, why screens in particular and social media also impact our kids negatively. And these are 4 things that our kids tend to struggle with, not always, but many of them struggle with anyway. So let's talk about emotion regulation. So, the first thing you need to know is that we as psychologists have gotten pretty good, particularly through cognitive behavior therapy, at treating depression and anxiety, particularly anxiety. And what do we know about anxiety? What is the one thing you have to do if you're afraid of something in order to get over that fear? You have to do it. It's called exposure, right? We know that. And depression, similarly, you have to do something, you have to do the opposite, it's called opposite action of what you want to do. If you're depressed, you have to be activated. You have to go and be social and do fun things and kind of exercise. Exercise is one of the greatest treatments for depression. In fact, when I see someone depressed that I work with, the first thing I say to them is, okay, we've had one session, make an exercise schedule this week. Nothing else. I'm not going to work on your thoughts. I'm not going to work on your mom. None of that. Make an exercise schedule. Behavioral activation. Now, let's think about phones in relation to those things. If you were to invent a device that prevented you, that made exposure less common and suppressed behavioral activation, in other words, made anxiety and depression more likely, you would probably invent a smartphone. Why? Because with screens, and I don't want to just say smartphones, because iPads and other things can be just as bad, or almost as bad, is that what do? We escape from our emotions. The moment a child's dysregulated, or the moment we're uncomfortable, what do? We pull out our phone to distract ourselves. I'm working with a woman who's a widow, and she lost her husband. It was very sad, and she's Shomer and Shabbat. She keeps Shabbat, and her hardest night of the week is Friday night. Why? It's a one night when she's feeling sad. She can't take out her phone to distract herself. Think of the billions of people who've lost someone, tragically or not, over the course of millennia, and have had to sit with that every night in the dark, without a phone or a television or something else to distract them. You actually have to process your grief. But she, 6 nights a week, doesn't have to, and it just is prolonging her grief. And it's one of the reasons it's very hard. So one of the things, if you take nothing else from tonight, what the problem here with phones is not just the phone, right? That's really the excuse. It's that we are preventing our kids from really focusing and kind of engaging in their emotions and really kind of dealing with it and being uncomfortable, which is okay. That's the only way you learn how to be resilient. So I'll avoid things that are hard, right? So we get to, on our phone, oh, I can't sit through something, I'll just take out my phone. I can't figure something out, I'll take out my phone and figure it out. It kind of gets us out of the many hard things to do, which is the problem here. It also keeps our body still, to the extent that I want you to go exercise, right? What does it look like when someone's holding a phone, particularly a kid? The only muscles they're moving are in one finger for hours. That's not normal, right? Think of children. Children move around, they need to be active. And until they have a screen in front of them, when there's a screen in front of them, all of a sudden they're placid. And that's, well, for a short time is fine, but not healthy 4 hours a day. It's also a great way to socially isolate. Wait, what about social media? Is that a great way to be social? No, that's not a great way to be social, because you're just texting other people and making fun of people, and there's bullying, and there's comparison. It's not the good stuff of socializing, which is that looking someone in the face, chatting with them, enjoying that company, enjoying the eye contact. That's how you really get the jolt of that social interaction. I happen to love kiddish, I know I'm an extrovert, but even for introverts, we need some of that, and the phone is a great way for people who are particularly socially anxious to avoid that, and then they get more and more anxious. How does this look? We know this, because this is how we understand anxiety from a CBT perspective, and is the basis for why CBT is the most effective treatment for anxiety, better even than medication. This is why. Because imagine you've got middle school girl, or when your kids are younger, imagine you have a lower school girl, 4th or 5th grade, who's a little socially anxious, and she's going to a new birthday party, right? Or a little kid who's going to a kindergarten birthday party. So they're anxious, they're coming in, I'm not sure what this space is going to be, their anxiety shoots up. What they tend to do is they do some avoidance behavior. I want to leave, can I go, I want to stand in the corner, I'm not going to engage, right? And then when they do that, and they kind of get away, or they convince you to take them home, their anxiety goes down. And what that does is, it reinforces two things. It says, oh, that avoidance really worked. You should do that more often. And oh, by the way, parties are scary, right? If we, right, the treatment here, if I were to see you, and you don't have to go to a therapist to figure this out. If you have a child who's anxious about birthday parties, they should go anyway. And they're gonna be anxious. And that's okay, because being uncomfortable is how you get over it. So they can go, they can be anxious, but if they stick around, they realize that this cycle doesn't have to persist, and that they can get over it and it gets easier. But every time they escape, it reinforces those two things. That's what happens. That's what phones supercharge. Now, we have been doing this as a culture now for 20 or 30 years. I think when I was growing up, probably when my parents were growing up, certainly, parents were like, you're scared? Go anyway, kick, right? And you didn't really have a choice. Now, I'm not necessarily advocating that. I'll get to what I am advocating in a minute. But the way that I heard one psychologist describe this as a comfort addiction. We think that the moment our children are uncomfortable, we have a problem. Because we as parents in our society are measuring our own success as parents based on our children's moment-to-moment happiness. We are measuring our success as parents based on our moment-to-moment happiness. It's kind of like investing based on a stock market every 5 minutes. Not a great way to invest, right? And not what you want in the long term, because just trying to feed the happy meter and keeping your kid kind of not unhappy all the time, just so they're always having fun, makes them miserable. Because when things happen that you can't control that are frustrating, they have no resilience, no ability to manage it. Kids need to be uncomfortable. They need to be bored. They need to have frustration. I'm not saying you should intentionally frustrate them, but there's a lot of natural frustrations. Sorry, there's no ice cream for dinner tonight. Sorry, I picked you up, not mom. Okay, we're going home anyway. And so we want to avoid that comfort addiction and let kids be uncomfortable in an age-appropriate way. I'm not saying torture your children. I'm saying let them be uncomfortable in age-appropriate ways, because that's how they develop resilience. The data on this is a little crazy. So there's a syndrome called affluenza. It's not in any book or anything, but it's been written. It's not an official DSM thing, but it's been written about. Affluenza is this weird thing that upper middle class, I'm not saying everyone in the room is in this category, but many families in this community are. Upper middle class and upper class kids have as high rates of psychopathology, if not higher, than kids in poverty. Upper middle class and upper class kids have as higher rates of psychopathology than kids in poverty. That's crazy, right? Kids in poverty have actual real stresses, not our kids, right? Okay, they have learning disabilities, they're here, they're gonna be okay. And yeah, that girl said something mean to you, and yeah, your homework's really hard tonight, and I couldn't have ice cream. Okay, those are really hard frustrations, but they're age appropriate. But what I think is going on with this affluenza problem is that we as a people in that stratum of society have a real ability to snowplow and make things really easy for their kids. They have the money, the resources, the time, the effort, the therapist, all those things. And if they're going for comfort and their kids' happiness moment to moment, the kids never develop that resilience over time. And so then they get pretty miserable. So kids need to tolerate discomfort rather than escaping, and they also need to rely on themselves and be a little bit more independent. The way we do this, let me talk about one more thing about that. So what we talk about, we're going to talk a lot about independence. There's a great website, letgrow.com, which is great and really pushes out. Have you read Free Range Kids or heard of Let Grow? Lenore Skenazy, only a couple people. Oh, this is good. So we really encourage you to look at it. You'll see it at the end. Don't worry, don't have to write it down. So here's the data on this, right? So here's the data on this. I'll talk about this. But here's the data on this, right? We tend not to allow our kids outside, right? How many of you, when you were growing up, went out till 6 o'clock in the evening? Wow, a lot. How many of you let your kids do that? Wow. Do you see the contrast? Less than half, right? Almost all of you did that. I actually didn't. There were no kids in my neighborhood. Everyone was watching TV, even though it was the 80s. I guess the 80s there was lots of TV. But in this room, most of you did it, and you don't let your kids. I don't have to ask you why. I know why. Because everyone thinks it's scary to let kids out. They might get hurt, and they might be abducted, right? They might be kidnapped. Something bad could happen to them. So here's the thing about kidnapping. You ready? Kidnapping's bad. I'm not going to advocate kidnapping. And I'm not going to talk about, I know, Israel's another kind of kidnapping. Let's talk about kidnapping on the streets of your neighborhoods, okay? Kidnapping by okay, so first of all, why do we know this is such a bad thing? Because we saw, many of us grew up with the milk cartons. Right? The milk cartons where we had the pictures of the kids who were missing, and it made us feel like there's like a pervasive kidnapping problem. Right? We heard about the Eitan Pates case in the early 70s. They're kind of a series of these things. And at that point, we saw that parents started bringing their kids inside and trying to protect them. Here's the actual data on kidnapping. The actual data is that most of those kids on the milk cartons were abducted by a family member in some kind of custody dispute. Now, that's a bad thing. But if you're not actively in a custody dispute, your child's not going to be subject to that, right? And what's the rate of stranger abduction? 1 in 1.5 million. That is much lower than the rate of getting hit by lightning. Okay? Now, what does that mean? That means that your child's not going to be abducted because no one wants your children. And what we've done is we've said, you need to stay inside, we need to protect you, we need to watch everything you do. And in a very unnatural way, no time in history have kids spent as much time in the guise of adults and other parents than we do in Western society nowadays. Mostly kids ran around in packs outside, kind of like figuring things out themselves, getting into scrapes, getting into arguments, dealing with other kids in the neighborhood, figuring out that they broke someone's window, they have to pay for it or run away, to figure all that stuff out, right? That's age appropriate. But keeping them inside makes them really dependent and feel less dependent. We are shaping them to kids who are much more dependent. I'll come back to that in a couple slides. What do we want them to do to get more confident? I'm going to make a quick pitch for the program called SPACE. SPACE is a treatment for anxiety in children, so childhood anxiety, that doesn't work with the child. It only works with the parents, and is as effective, according to the research, as working with the child. Okay? So your child is interested in doing anxiety treatment with a therapist? That's fine. You and your partner go, you work on this stuff together, and your results should be the same. And it's based on this one statement. Obviously, there's more to it, but I see you're really anxious about that. You're validating, and I know you can get through it. Right? Your child's afraid of open windows. Someone's going to come abduct them. I know you're really. I'm not closing the window. I know it's really scary for you. I know you can get through it. that's it, and then you walk away. And your child may have a tantrum, be upset, and guess what? They will eventually get used to having open windows, or whatever it is. I know you're really scared about going to a birthday party. I really understand it. It's all new people, and I know you can get through it. It's amazing how many things, and if we can avoid enabling, we know that that's, now the phones unfortunately enable us to do that. I'm going to come back to this example a few times. How many of you have seen, I'm not going to ask you if you do this yourself, how many of you have seen young children with phones or iPads in restaurants? How many of you used a phone or iPad when you were a child and went to a restaurant? Funny how that works. How do children learn to sit in a restaurant? Look, my kids are a little bit older than yours. I took my kids to restaurants for many years. It was really annoying, right? Because they wanted to move around and they made noise and bothering the other customers. And I remember there's one time my son did something and we threatened a consequence and he did it again and I had to literally take him home separately from his siblings while everyone else finished dinner. It was annoying. But now what do? We don't do that, right? And by the way, now they sit in restaurants just fine. And then they send us the bill. They're older. So what do we do when we give a 1.5-year-old, this is a very cute 1.5-year-old, sitting in a restaurant with a bunch of family members or friends, or they look like lovely people. We hand them a phone, we deprive them of the opportunity of being uncomfortable while waiting. Yeah, it's annoying to wait. And maybe you need to draw on the placemat, you need to go look at the fish tank, or you need to chat with his family, but it's annoying to wait for 15 to 20 minutes for your food. And guess what? That's how you learn how to wait. My mother loves to say this. It's hard to wait. And then you wait. Okay, so I'm going to come back to this example. How does this impact our kids? A lot of kids and Shefa have difficulty with attention and executive functioning, and the phone is, as we all kind of implicitly know, is a real generator of short attention spans. So let's just focus on what is ADHD for a moment. I welcome you back. You can actually search for it online. I talk about what ADHD is on YouTube a couple times. Hopefully we'll do it another time, maybe this year or next year. But I'm going to take a little tiny bit from that talk, because it explains why phones are so bad. So ADHD, the theory that Russell Barkley has put out that's dominant in ADHD literature, is that it's based on self-regulation. Self-regulation is something you do to yourself. It's a thoughtful intention to change your behavior in order to change the outcome of what you're doing, right? So it's really kind of, you have to stop and think about something. And what is ADHD? ADHD's core deficit is impulse control. That is the break, the stop. It's not how smart you are. It's not that you don't know what you're doing. It's like, oh, I wanted to call in class. Wait, stop. That's not a good time. Oh, I am paying attention to my homework, but there is a fire truck outside. Oh my God, look at the fire truck. What was I doing? That's what it is. It's that difficulty with stopping that impulse, that automatic impulse. And that can lead to difficulty with attention, with movement, with cutting people off, with making kind of behavioral mistakes. So, how does this play out? There's some great things about kids with ADHD. I want to emphasize that. ADHD is a blessing in a lot of ways. It makes kids really creative and out of the box. They're impulsive in their thinking. It also makes it hard for them to sustain attention to things that are boring because they're going for the most exciting thing in the world right now, right? Here's the interesting contrast. Kids with ADHD really struggle with things that they find boring. Homework, setting the table, making the bed. Oh, so boring. Can't possibly do that. But they tend to hyper-focus on things they like. This is not well known. People come to me and say, my child doesn't have ADHD. They can sit and play video games for hours. I said, exactly. That's ADHD. Kids with ADHD, or people with ADHD, are known to pay attention to things they love longer than typically developing brains. Right? The contrast. We all pay attention to things we like better than things we don't like. So think, for example, of your favorite Netflix show compared to me. Right? You're going to pay much better attention to your favorite Netflix show. I'm a little boring at 8:30 at night. But we know that if you're the ADHD, that contrast is even greater. Right? You're not only you pay less attention to me, hopefully you're not sleeping yet, but you're going to pay even better attention to that Netflix show. A couple more things to note. ADHD has a lot of executive dysfunction, difficulty with organizing, because you're really impulsive about putting things together. You don't have the patience to stop and say, I'm going to organize this. And leads to difficulties with delaying gratification, right? Waiting out. This is the famous marshmallow test where the length of time a 4-year-old could wait to eat a marshmallow was correlated with their SAT scores when they were 16. Old-time study, well known. Walter Michel, my professor at Columbia back in the day. There's a lot, it's a very complicated case, but anyways, that's well known. Let me dramatize this for you. Let me give you the story of Adam and Lana. Made up their names, but they're real friends of mine. And they were not quite dating, they were kind of dating, interested in each other. They were in college. And Adam was studying in Israel, and Lana was going to visit Israel in to break in like early January. So what did she do? They're a little bit older than most of the people in this room, so this is before email and all that stuff. What did Lana do? She went to the post office and got an aerogram. Who knows what an aerogram is? Oh, okay, whew, most of you do, but I know some of you don't. Okay, an aerogram is a blue sheet of paper that you fold into 3, and you put it in the mail with an address, and it goes airmail to wherever you're going. And so that was the most efficient way to communicate back and forth. My parents, in 1968, when my father was in Israel, my mother was here, have like hundreds of aerograms they sent back and forth. It's very cute. So Lana gets an aerogram, she goes to the post office, she buys an aerogram. She writes her message, can I come visit you in Israel in January? It takes a week to get to Israel. Adam gets it, he reads it, oh, I'm very excited to see Lana, she's so cute. He goes to the post office, he buys an aerogram, he fills it out, says, yes, you can come visit me. He sends it back to America. Great, 2.5 weeks later, she knows she's got plans when she gets to Israel. But what if Adam wasn't available? What if he was busy? What would have happened? Lana would have gotten the response, oh, I'm sorry, I can't see you. Then she would have thought, well, who else am I going to see? What are my plans going to be? Who am I going to stay with? She would have gone to get another aerogram, bring to another friend, and figured it out. And that's why she had to start in November, because she'd know how many back and forth she would need before January. I have 2 kids in Israel right now. How do I communicate with them? It's a thing called WhatsApp. And when I WhatsApp them, and they don't respond within 2 minutes, I'm annoyed. Right? So I don't have any delay of gratification. Think about how we all have trouble waiting, and trouble and waiting through things. And our brains are already fully formed-ish, and we did not grow up with this. Now think about our kids as their brains are plastic. They're just being formed. And they're being formed in a world where everything is instant. And they don't know how to have the executive functioning to get an aerogram and plan things out in advance. They don't know how to wait, forget it, for 15 minutes for food, let alone for a month and a half to figure out where they're going to stay when they get to Israel. ADHD also looks like dysregulation of emotions. And this goes back to our first point, right? To the extent that phones are suppressing our kids' ability to manage their discomfort and kind of go through it, then that makes their emotion dysregulation and impulsivity even worse. So people would say like, oh, my kid is so dysregulated after they're on the phone. Or the more I give them the phone, the more dysregulated they are. Now you see why. How does this actually, what do we see from the data? This is a little bit of a hypothesis that I have. I'm pretty confident in it, but I don't know that, I can't say that this is database just yet. We know that ADHD affects 5% of the population across the world. It is just the end of the bell curve, right? It's not like kids with ADHD are like they're not aliens. They're just have less executive functioning and more impulsivity than the average. Like I'm kind of in the middle somewhere. Some people I know are like, they're kind of down here. They're like close to ADHD, but they kind of manage. The people who are really, really, really good at executive functioning and can organize everything, I hate those people. They're at the other end of the bell curve. What do we think we're doing as a society? We're not changing. Now, ADHD is also one of the most genetically determined disorders that we know. It is 0.8 out of 1. It's 8%, which means that it's the only thing that we know that is more genetic than that really is height. Right? Think how much height is herited. It's really quite heritable. It's not really affected by environment. But what we think is going on, and we've doubled the number of kids who are getting ADHD diagnoses, is that we've just moved the entire bell curve over. Think about it. How many of you struggle to read or pay attention as long as you used to? Right? And naturally, I think we're doing the whole bell curve, whether you have ADHD or not, is moving over. Think about this nowadays. My kids who are teens, they don't like watching movies. Movies were the most exciting, most relaxing thing I could do when I was a kid. Movies are too long. I'd rather watch a Netflix show for 20 minutes, or a YouTube video for 10, or better yet, TikTok for 15 seconds. Right? Now, go back to the days of radio, and think of the kind of long attention span you had to spend to get to listen to the story, and imagine in your mind over a half an hour period. That was the most exciting thing. Think about what was most distracting in school 120 years ago was a comic book. And they would put the comic books inside their books, and that was really naughty. Right now, we wish our kids would read graphic novels. Right? Because that was the most distracting thing. We've just continued to move that line for all of us. And we come back to the restaurant. And a kid who we want to extend their delay of gratification, their ability to wait it out, their ability to pay attention, but no, we give them a phone. Language development. Kids at the Schwab school struggle with their language development. And this is some data about that. There is a long-term kind of theory, there's some research about it, although the research wasn't perfect, but it suggests that people in different socioeconomic classes have as much as a 30 million word gap in language spoken to them in their preschool years. So between, I think it's about 2 and 5 or 0 and 5, I can't remember, but up till age 5, some kids got 42 million words said to them, and some kids have 11 million, which is, kind of 4 times as much. And the theory was, and then it's predicted all kinds of things like their achievement. So the more verbal interaction you have with an adult in your preschool years, that leads to better language development by kindergarten, which then leads to your academic achievement throughout your schooling. So if you want your 3-year-old to really achieve in school, one of the most important things you can do with them right now is talk to them. Just talk to them. Have conversations about at their level. Maybe read to them. Maybe, invite them into conversations with the family. And again, 3-year-olds are 3-year-olds. It's not, it's going to be a mess. But that's okay. What you should not be doing is putting them in front of the TV. Because we know that those kids from lower socioeconomic groups who didn't get as much language, it wasn't that they weren't hearing language. They were watching TV a lot. But when you hear it passively, you don't pick up the language the way you do in interactive language. So now think about phones. Phones, forget your kid. Think about yourself. How often are you holding a phone that's between you and your child? How many opportunities have you lost to have a conversation, as annoying and weird as it would be with a 3-year-old, and instead you're looking at your phone, or they want to look at your phone? There's also less reading too. Let kids read less and are read to less because of phones, which is a great way to pick up language. And all the language they do understand is what we call textees, right? They're just learning, this is more like middle schoolers, who learn language from 140 characters that have no grammar. All right, so we're back in the restaurant with our 1.5-year-old who could be having a conversation for 15 to 20 minutes or whatever, 45 minutes while they're sitting in the restaurant with all those lovely people sitting around. But instead, he's on a phone learning no language. Social development. We know that that phones cause us to have fewer in-person interactions, and we get less practice with eye contact, body language, we miss appropriate social feedback, and this connectivity, not only does it miss opportunities for that face-to-face interaction, but that connectivity pushes kids to all kinds of expectations that we get from social media. There's a lot of bullying that happens on our chats. Phones are really very, very challenging for social development, and we know that's another area that our kids at Schwab often struggle with. So, once again, and we know that, and by the way, this is the data. So the data is that every group starting in 2009 started to hang out less with people, with friends, but most dramatically people 15 to 24. This is the number, the daily time with friends went from a high point, I guess in 2009 it was about 130 hours a day to 40. So about 2/3 drop in the amount of social time our kids spent once we introduced phones and screens into the mix. That's 1/3 the amount they have to give. Again, we're back to our lovely restaurant where this child has an opportunity to have all kinds of social interactions, but they're missing out. So, you're here at a special education school, which we're so privileged to have your students here, and they need to be here, and we're giving them what they need. But I want to add something in terms of what we're remediating. Right? So there's a great quip that America was the country that invented the escalator and the stairmaster. Right? Think about that. America is the country that invented the escalator and the stairmaster. And wouldn't it be nice if we invented neither? Right? And then we could actually just all take steps all the time. I, for one, this is one of the things I really push I try to walk up to my 9th floor office multiple times a day. Today I did it with my lunch from the cellar because there were too many kids in the elevator. And it's hard. But the more I do it, the better in shape I am. Now, would we be able to get rid of the Stairmaster and exercise if we didn't have escalators? No, we still need to exercise. And would we still need ways to get people with disabilities upstairs that are easier, or people with packages? Sure. So it's not, but this is essentially what we're doing to our kids. What we're doing to our kids is we're saying, we're going to give you an escalator all the time, make your life super, super, super easy, not give you, give you a phone instead of reading to you and talking to you and social interactions, and then we're going to do the Stairmaster part, which is all of the therapies and OT and meds and all those things that we need to do. Now, do some kids need those anyway, like the kids of your families? They do, but they probably wouldn't be nearly as much if we just spent less time avoiding the natural ways for them to develop these skills. time spent running around, interacting in person, planning out long-term projects. I remember one time I was obsessed with baseball as a kid, and I made this huge poster with all the pennants of all the teams, and I put Velcro on them so I could put them in order of where they were in the, like that was a long-term project. I finished it and I never actually used it. But I worked on it for weeks, and like that kind of long-term project, I don't see kids doing nearly as much. If they do it, fantastic. We try to do it in our Chesed Center here and really give them opportunities, but we want them to be doing it all the time. The other problem is that we are unlike food, right? Kids overeat, eventually they get sick and they get full. There is no satiation point in technology. And so there's no natural way to say, oh, they'll get sick of it eventually. That's not how kids tend to function. That's not how we tend to function. Okay, so how do we do this? How do we respond? I've scared you enough? Are you all scared? Okay, sorry. How do we do this? So I'm going to give some overview of how we think about it, and then over the year we'll get more specifics. Okay, this is the first part. This is going to be a little counterintuitive. Tech is here to stay. Standing up here and saying, I'm the new evangelist, go throw out your phones so your kids are never getting phones, that is not going to happen. Our kids are going to have phones for the rest of their lives. I know I sent I have twins, and their last summer as campers, they're now counselors. Last summer as campers, I sent them off, and I said, wow, you're about to lose your phones for 7 weeks. This is the longest you will not have your phones for the rest of your lives. How do you feel about it? They said, we feel great. Why do you feel great? You're giving up your phones. You love your phones. They're like, because everyone we want to talk to is right there. Right? So our kids are going to have phones. We have to accept that, and we have to deal with it because that's, that we can't all be in camp all the time. We need to acknowledge the good. It's fun. It's efficient. We have the communications. I'm not giving up WhatsApp to my kids in Israel, especially when they're in a bomb shelter for an hour, and then, it doesn't matter. It was in the middle of a meeting with Alyssa, the director of admissions, and boys were calling. We got out of the bomb shelter. We're fine. Thank God for that. We need assistive technology. But talk to text is helpful. Keyboarding. There's all kinds of learning tools we can use. There's safety that we can use. We can call for. We can have it just in case of something. These are all good things, and why we don't give up our phones. We need to acknowledge that to ourselves and to our kids, because when we start saying the phones are bad, they know we're lying. They know that we love them too. But we need to be realistic about the pros and cons and find the moderation balance. And it's always harder to find the gray than to find the extreme. So that's what we're going to have to work on. The other piece that I wanted to say is that overall is really discuss this and learn from our kids, right? This is a conversation we're having with our kids because because you're all lower school parents, you may have some control over your children now. That is going to slowly evaporate, let me tell you, as a parent of kids who are 18 and 21. My control is minimal at this point. So if I don't have open lines of communication, if they're not going to come to me when they see something really scary on the internet that they don't understand, if I'm not going to talk to them about why I'm trying not to use my phone at dinner, they're not going to be learning from me. So we need to keep those lines of communication open and recognize there's good and bad, and how do we do this in the middle. By the way, one of the ways that people compared, one of the comparisons of phones is to smoking, right? And smoking, we know, in 1964, the Surgeon General's report came out. It causes cancer, it kills you. What happened in the next 10 years? Smoking went up slightly. Early 70s, it got up a couple percentage points from 42 to 44%. What? It kills you. Now it's forbidden. It's really attractive. It's cool. It only became less cool when we started to say, smoking's gross. It smells. And no offense to any smokers in the room, but it's not as socially acceptable to smoke. And only once it became kind of shameful or gross did people really stop doing it. And now we've gotten down to 11% in America. So that's not a great analogy because phones are going to be with us. What's a better analogy? A better analogy is food. If someone has an eating disorder, they can't just say, you know what, it's better if cigarettes had never been invented. There's not really a lot of social good that comes from it. Food is necessary. Food is something we all need. And if you have trouble with an eating disorder, you have to learn to live with it. And that's hard. Same thing with phones. Phones are with us. They provide a lot of powerful good, and we need to figure out how to use them effectively and live with them. This is a point that, this is, I think, the best quote from all Jonathan Haidt's book. We overprotect in the real world and underprotect in the virtual world. We have this assumption that sending them outside to scrape a knee, get into a fight with their siblings or someone down the street, to break a window, and they're not likely to get kidnapped, right? They're probably going to, something normal is going to happen to them, those normal things. That is scarier than what they're going to see online. But do you really think that's true? Knowing what's online, the cesspool that's out there, and then knowing that just the virtue of sitting and not moving and being on that phone and not interacting with people and not learning language, we see the dangers of that. I think we are doing this big time. So what do we do about that? We need to remember that our world, despite everything you see on the news, right? The other thing that was happening that really freaked us out is that news stations, instead of covering like really important topics like, I don't know, like corruption in government, they tend to deal with things like what bleeds leads, right? And so it's a lot about the random, horrible, and it's not a good thing, but there's a horrible crime that happened over here, and it makes it feel pervasive in a city of 8 million people that crime is everywhere. The actual data is the opposite. We live roughly in the safest time physically of any people ever in the world. We live roughly in the safest time of any people ever in the world, and yet we don't let our kids go outside for fear they're going to get hurt. Now they could get hurt. And we know but it's pretty unlikely anything major is going to happen. And we also know how bad it's going to be if they just stay in line all the time. So you have to start balancing it out. Oh, I want to say one thing I forgot to mention at the beginning is if you have to leave early, until you understand it's late, you don't need anyone in the elevator. You can press 1 without swiping. Okay, so don't feel bad if you leave. Fully protecting kids is not possible, and kids learn from taking risks. Age-appropriate failure is important. I think that harms are more likely online in most cases than in real life, and we need to really think that through. I'm not saying it never happens in real life, and we can take reasonable precautions. We don't let kids, like, when they're 5 years old, bike to the next town over. But maybe when they're 10 or 11, they can bike a couple miles away. Also, before we do anything, we have to focus on our own technication. The conversations I have about this always end in the same place. You know what? This is really about me. I really struggle to put my phone down. I'm really obsessed with social media. I have trouble being, sitting with my kids and talking to them. They're kind of boring. And so I pick up my phone when I'm bored. We are the models. Our kids learn more from what we do than from all our words combined, than from a colleague of mine. Our kids learn more from what we do than from all our words combined. Screens are not babysitters and they're not pacifiers. I saw a cousin, when I did this talk at North Shore Hebrew Academy, beforehand I had a cousin there, and she came out, I didn't realize she was coming, it was so delightful she came. She had a couple of young kids, she said, oh my God, my kids were stressing me out, I just threw iPads at them. Yeah, that's what we can do, right? It's a great way to pacify that. It's just like, oh yeah, now I realize that what I should be doing is actually gotta wait it out, and it might have a good consequence, I might have to ignore them, I have to be a parent. And parenting by iPad is not gonna be the best way. Boredom is painful. It's painful for us. Kids hate it. It's really uncomfortable, and it's extremely productive. Our best creativity, our best resilience comes from boredom, right? Picture the scene. Mom, I'm bored. And you start listing out the 10 things they can do. No, I don't want to do those things. They're so boring. Walk away. Give them 3 choices, and walk away and say, all right, if you don't want those things, they're going to say no, and let them figure it out. I give them 10 minutes. In 10 minutes, they'll either be doing something on your list, or they'll figure something else out. But if you just give in that point and say, oh, they're bored, therefore I need to make them happy right now because that's the only way I'm a good parent, you're feeding into this beast. There's also a spectrum of harm here, right? This is part of the balance, is that, and I don't want to go this in depth, I think we'll do this more in an email later because I'm mindful of the time, is that we actually think, we don't have a lot of data to support this, but we think this is true, and some things are less harmful than others. For example, FaceTiming grandparents who live in Israel is kind of great. I don't see much downside to that at all, right? That's just great use of screens. You're interacting, there's more or less eye contact, you're having a conversation. Fantastic. Now, is it as good as Saba and Sapna visiting and giving a hug? No. But they can't do that every week. And so doing that every week or a couple times a week, fantastic. Right? All right, Spotify, listening to music, that's not so bad. TV, when it's in the, everyone's watching together, you're watching a movie together, you're watching a sports event together. All right, Netflix is a little bit more. Now you got an iPad that's a personal device. All right, they're on their own. Now you're obsessed with your video games. I remember when I first got to video games, my first obsession was Civilization. Remember Civilization? All right, only the nerds. Great. I remember the first time I played it, I was probably like 12 or 13 or something, and I was in my room, and I was in there for 14 hours. I forgot to eat. To eat. And my parents were like, what happened to you? Right? And I was like, I don't know. All the way to phones and social media. So we have to really think through. We're not throwing this all in the garbage. We know this is all part of our society, part of our culture. The question is, can we do more of the less harmful things and less of the more harmful things? Increase other activities that replace the phone. Yes, you're going to have to do more activities with your family, and don't always plan things, and sometimes they're going to be bored, and they're going to have to be creative. So you can also say, sorry, no phone, figure it out. So you can do both of those things, and you want to think about being social, outdoor, child-directed, more risky. Kids really need risk. more independence. Send them to the corner. Oh, can you go pick me up some milk at the corner store when they're 7 or 8 or 10? They should do that. Do something spiritual. Music. We love singing in our family. And sometimes we can actually get our kids to do that. Play board games with them, or let them be bored. And then the collective action problem. Because we know that if we tell you that, you know what, don't give your kid a phone, but everyone else in the class is going to have a phone by 6th grade, that's social suicide, especially for girls. You won't be able to stand it. I was just talking to a parent before who said that her 8th grader lost her dumb phone. I forget what it was called.
Light phone.
The light phone. But then you can't get a light phone because it's become so popular. So they had to get an iPhone because she's in 8th grade. She doesn't want to feel out of it. So we need, as a community, to come together, and this is what we're going to need your help, to think through how we do this. So first of all, we have a phone-free school, right? It's something we started doing already last year. We collect phones at the door. We don't even let them in our lockers because we saw kids sneaking into lockers and going to the bathroom and using it. No, they are out of the picture the moment they walk in the building, and we actually don't hand it back to the middle schoolers until they're walking out of the building. We used to give it to them before dismissal. Even that was addictive. We're like, no, you only get it when you walk out of the building. So we're using less and less educational technology. The screens in the front we have, we have mixed feelings about it, but they're helpful, and that's for the group, but we're using less, for example, middle school, middle schoolers, but the middle school no longer has a one-to-one Chromebook program. We stopped it. We used to have it. We saw that I was on 8th grade for last year. 8th graders would take their laptop around, and then in between classes they'd be checking the hockey scores or looking at videos. And it wasn't anything bad, but I'm like, talk to your friends. You're in 8th grade. So we actually took them away. We use Chromebooks whenever we need them and can pull them out to do a Google Doc, but they don't have them all day. We recommend no group chats until middle school. And even then, it's tricky because group chats are very hard for kids to manage. The recommendation is no smartphones until 9th. We're going to have more conversations about that. That's Jonathan Hyde's recommendation. No social media until 16 years old. We do think it's important to do them before they leave your house, so you can give them some guidance as they're learning that. We encourage you to think about screen-free play dates and sleepovers. We love the idea of bar and bat mitzvahs that collect phones at the door, so kids aren't in the corner on their phones. They actually talk, eat food, dance, make one of those really messy drinks, whatever, all those things. We used to melt candles. I don't know, we saw wacky things, but that's much more appropriate than being on their phone in the corner. And ending group chats at a certain time. This is a real community issue. By the way, this is all on your handouts. You can take pictures like mom. It's all on your handouts. If you as a class say, what we hear all the time is that their group chats are going till 11 o'clock at night. Well, if you as a class can come together and say, we're cutting off group chats at 8, then no one's missing out. All right, it's not too late. We have 2 models of success in the Jewish community that I'd like to point to that show that we can really do this. The first one, Shabbat. Now, not everyone in this room or in this school or in any school keeps Shabbat the same way, but there are many communities that we're a part of where even if people use technology privately, they don't use them publicly. Right? So it's not about your personal use of technology in Shabbat, it's about the communal use of technology. And in those communities, even people who use it in the privacy of their homes would never take it out at a meal when they're sitting around. What happens at those meals? Those meals go on forever. In my house, it's not unusual for people to leave my house at 5 o'clock, right? Or for me to fall asleep on someone else's couch and wake up and go home, right? And I hope this is your experience. There's a Hill director who was quoted as saying, I know within 3 minutes when I meet a freshman whether they keep Shabbat, whether they have Shabbat meals in their family. Not keep Shabbat, whether they have Shabbat meals. How do I know? Because those are the only kids who can talk to me for more than 3 minutes without looking at their phones. Right? We, as a Jewish community, have actually a model of doing this communally, is where we come together and we can have these long, luxurious, sometimes boring, sometimes scintillating, sometimes hysterical conversations for hours on end. And again, it doesn't mean you have to practice, but we do know, by the way, we know this. What do all the really big tech people in Silicon Valley do that aren't Jewish? They have tech Shabbat. They know how addictive this stuff is, and they put away technology for 24 hours. We actually have that in our tradition. We also have summer camp. Like I referenced before, I'll give you another story. I was in Israel in February on a mission, and I met a guy that I don't usually go on group trips. I usually go by myself, but I was on a group trip because it was after October 7th, and we were going to specific places I couldn't get on my own. And so I met another participant who was a big kind of Jewish leader in Chicago, and he found out my last name. He said, I know your cousin. Oh, you know my cousin from camp? Awesome. He said one of the wisest things to me, and I'm thinking, that cousin? okay. I'm like, he's 17, he's a little impulsive, he's an interesting kid. He's a great kid. He said, what did he say? He said, we were at camp, and he said, you know why I love camp? Because conversations never end. I said, what do you mean by that? He said, well, at home, when I'm talking with my friends, he's a very social kid. When I'm talking with my friends, we're like, oh, and what happened in the Cubs game last night? And then we pull out our phones, and they're looking at the Cubs game, and then the conversation trails off. He says, in camp, I wake up in the morning, and when I go to bed, I'm still having the same conversation. Now, I don't doubt it, because he's probably talking through Tula and all his classes. But still, I think it's a good story. So that's another model of how we do it. And by the way, kids tell us in many different ways, including at camp, but also in also in surveys, if they knew that everyone else would give up social media or give up their phones, they would too. They know how harmful it is. Kids actually don't mind giving it up when they know that they're not missing out. Your kids probably will fetch it first, but they also recognize the harms. What's our plan? We are going to base this on our values, particularly kedusha, sacredness, and brit, covenantal responsibility to one another. We're going to do this as a partnership. This is not just going to be, we are going to impose a thing and say, everyone at Schwab School must not give their kids phones until 9th grade. If that would work, I would love to do that. I don't think it'll work. We want to do this together and really have this be a pledge that is coming from our guidance, but also from your buy-in. So this is school, families, and students. We want to be slow and steady. This is culture change. This is not a quick fix. This is so deeply embedded in our culture. We started with in-school changes that we've described, and we want you to work with each other, and we want to collaborate with other schools. One of the benefits that we have is that I am currently working with approximately 8 other Jewish day schools right now. I've spoken at 2 or 3 already. I'm booked at another 6, I think. I'm going to LA in a couple of weeks to speak at 2 different schools. This is something that I've been deeply embedded in the Jewish world through the Schwab Center. And one of the things that I'm really excited to do is learn from everyone else's mistakes. So I can come back and say, I can tell you what hasn't worked. One of the things that has not worked is the long email that a lot of schools sent over the summer on all the guidelines. Because you know what? I saw the best one was from a school in Brooklyn. And it was an excellent email. It was very visual. It was very gorgeous. And then I went to Deal. And it's the same community. And I was talking to them about because I'm going to Hillel and Deal. And I said, oh, that was a great email that school sent. And they're like, yeah, it was so great. It was so long, though, I didn't read it. So we're not going to do that. We're going to send you short emails. And we're going to try to dole this out slowly over time so that you can really digest it and really try things. So here's our first ask. We need some parent ambassadors, people who are willing to sit, co-think with us about this, have a conversation with people in your grades. If you're not already signed up, you can do the QR code here. There's a QR code on your handouts as well. Email me after. We need some parent ambassadors to help us out. It's not a big gig. It's really a few meetings and then kind of working with your fellow parents to encourage them to participate. We're going to survey you and see where you're all at already. We're going to survey our students also. We want to start a book club for the Ancient Generation and other books. Anyone wants to join us? If you've read it already. We're going to send out guidelines and strategies. My goal is about once a month. I want to dole it out again over time, and then we'll put together a website where they'll all be. We're going to ask people to pledge to certain things. We're not going to say just pledge to no phones. We want them to be more complicated. We want to be more interesting. Do you pledge to stop group chats at 8 o'clock? This is based on your grade. Or 6 o'clock. Do you pledge to not have phones at the dinner table? Do you pledge to have phone-free or phone-light playdates? There are all different ways that we can do this. We're going to develop this with you by grade. We want to support you and really encourage you. We know how hard it is to set limits. This is one of my favorite things, is talking to parents about setting limits. And that's our plan. Questions? Oh.
I have several questions, but
Start with one.
a sort of low-hanging fruit one is like, in this particular community, there are so many people whose kids are commuting, and I think like 99% of those kids have phones.
I have such an issue with that. It kills me.
So I was just, wondering kind of what your thoughts are on that.
Phones on long transportation. And if you have to leave, we totally understand. We promised 8:50. I'll cut myself up at 9.
You're gonna go ahead.
Okay. Phones on long transportation. That is the number one request that we get for us to set a limit about, and is the number one thing that I've said no to. Because we are in a very unique position as a school where our kids come from as far as 2.5 hours in the afternoon. And so I actually think that's one of the highest hanging fruit. So this is what I would like. This is why this has got to be a top-down, bottom-up at the same time. I would like to talk to families on the White Plains or Newer Shell bus, and on the buses from Long Island, and by grade, and think through how we can solve this. Because it's very hard to take away a phone from one kid and not have the other kids. Maybe their phone or their iPad is only in use on the bus. Maybe we just restrict what they do on the bus, and maybe it gets taken away the moment they get off the bus. But actually, that's one of the hardest problems that we as a community have. Most of the communities I'm working with are local neighborhoods, right? Hillel and Deal, which I'm spending a whole day at in a couple of weeks, they all live in Deal, right? They don't have hour-and-a-half commutes, so it's not an issue. But I think we have to really, I'm not sure what the answer is to that question. That's what I'm saying, and that's why we have to think about this together. Yeah.
So I'm gonna piggyback more. I have never raised my kids with watching, super against watching. I've been on this bandwagon for way before it was a thing. My kids have never watched more before they were on Schwab busing, because now they watch for 2 hours a day with every other kid, and not from my iPads and not from anything I'm sending, but from everybody else's. So
Yes. I think we're going to have to do this by transportation, and that's why this has got to be legal. Yep.
I think we're also in a really unique position where many bringing one child or two children in this school, and then children in other schools where the rules are going to be different. And it's hard to create technologies over for your family when you have different schools and different policies.
So yes, your kids are in other schools. That is the second thing that's going to make this harder for Shepherd than most schools, is that unlike other schools that are K-12, and most kids and most of their siblings go there, that's the rule is that most of your siblings don't go here. So and I would add, many of the older siblings who may already have phones, right? Hopefully most lower schoolers here don't. Some of them do, but certainly their older siblings do. So what does that mean? That means a lot of work with other schools and connecting with them so that we're kind of all getting on the same page. I will say that I'm very encouraged to see that many of the schools that our kids go to, their siblings go to, are getting on this bandwagon. It is uneven, it's a mess, and we have to also be comfortable with having slightly different standards per kid, but that's going to be very tricky. So that's one of my jobs, is to think through, I went to North Shore, I'm going to Hillel, I'm going to 2 schools in Jersey, like getting all these schools kind of on the same page, and hopefully that'll be easier, even though it's not going to be easy. Yeah.
Sorry.
Let's go.
I have more of like I don't know what you would call this question. So on one hand, you're saying that ADHD is very, very much genetically passed. And then on the other hand, you're saying that there's been this rewiring. Like,
I think it's made it harder for everybody.
right. So to me, there's some inconsistency in those. And like, I have a 7-year-old who never had screens. They still don't. They're allowed to watch probably 3 to 4 hours of screens a week, Friday afternoon and Sunday morning. They do not have, they're twins. She doesn't have an iPad, she doesn't have a watch, she doesn't have a tablet, she's nothing. And she's raging ADHD, right? And I guess just, do you have an understanding of, how, like, that 5 to 10%, are you saying that it was always 10%, but 5% was remediated by all the things the kids aren't getting now? Or are you saying there's actually been a rewiring that is now being passed on genetically?
So the line to ADHD is not some magic line, it's a line to dysfunction. All psychopathology is it's all regular, it's all behavior that happens across the spectrum. But when you get to a certain line, it gets so dysfunctional to be that extreme that it's hard. For example, anxiety. Everyone else feels anxiety. Anxiety is a healthy and normal emotion. If not, we'd all be dead. We've been eaten by saber-toothed tigers a long time ago. So anxiety is important. And when you're really, really anxious about everything or about something to the point that you can't function, you're so anxious you can never go to a party or meet someone new, that's the line of dysfunction. What I'm saying in that graph, going back to take too long, is not that our genetics have changed, right? It's too fast. Genetics don't change in 10 years, right? That bell curve is the same. What we've all done to ourselves is made all of our ability to attend worse, right? So we move the whole thing over to the side, right? We're still in the same bell curve. The most ADHD kids are still the most ADHD kids, people in the middle, etc. But it's made us all struggle more to pay attention, so the line of dysfunction is in a different spot. More and more people are being snatched up at the end, on that far end, because it's harder for them to function in, let's say, a classroom, which has not changed as much in the last 10 years as technology has. Right? So it's just that more and more kids are caught in the dysfunction of a place where they're not being reinforced with screens all the time, very, very fast. So yes, your child who has very little screen time and has ADHD, that is genetic. And the kids who are now being caught in that extra 10%, they were always going to struggle, but because they've gotten even less practice of attending for longer, they are more dysfunctional than they would have been otherwise. All right, it is 9 o'clock. I thank you all for staying. If you have more questions, please join the parents and doctors. Thank you all.